My biggest advice is if even for a moment you think you might regret not doing something, then do it. If you think about it too hard, you're going to start worrying and second guessing yourself. Your plan is never going to go exactly how planned it in your head, but it's still an adventure that you'll remember for the rest of your life.
Hello, listeners. That was our guest you heard for our inaugural episode of the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. We'll hear more from her in a moment. But first, 2 questions for you. Do you want to break out of your daily routine someday to go on an adventure? Do you want some ideas or a little inspiration and motivation to get yourself started? That's what this podcast is all about, with a variety of guests who have done some really cool things, most of which you could do too if you put your mind to it. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dale Simonson, and I encourage you to check out our accompanying website, www.gocarpediemnow.com, for lots more adventures. Again, that's gocarpediemnow.com. Enjoy the show. I have a really special guest today, in particular special to me. This is someone who has sailed twice across the Atlantic Ocean, spent a whole year, in fact, spent a gap year before university, living on a sailboat. And the reason she's so special is it's my daughter. It's my daughter, Megan. Wow, this feels like some sort of nepotism, but really, Megan has a great story to tell about the big decision she made for that gap year. And I think it's really cool. Like, life is short. Why not do something really unique like that when you can? Because she could. She had that opportunity. So, Megan, welcome to our show. Thank you for joining today. As a father, I am honored and tickled pink to have you here. For starters, could you give a little background on yourself?
Hi, Dad. Well, I'm super honored to be a guest on your podcast. I guess this really does prove that I'm your favorite daughter.
Yeah, okay, whatever.
But a little bit about me is that I am currently a junior at Colorado College studying business and economics. I love being outdoors, so living in Colorado Springs has just been life-changing, and I know you're jealous, Dad. I'm really involved with Colorado College athletics. I'm on the swim and dive team. I lead a swimming volunteer program. I'm one of the social media managers for the team, and I'm also on the student athlete advisory committee as well. And growing up, I did spend 6 years living in Hong Kong as well, and I've been really lucky to have traveled to many countries as a kid. Sometimes I honestly forget that I took a gap year because my transition into college after that was so smooth. Like, sometimes I literally scare myself when I look at the tattoo that we both got on our ankles.
Oh gosh,
yeah.
The tattoo. I never, ever would have thought I'd let my daughter get a tattoo or even advocate it or get one myself. But I guess that's sort of sailor's tradition when you cross the Atlantic, is to get an anchor tattoo, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, except I usually think it's a spider crawling on me, so...
Well, if you hadn't designed it to look like a spider. So, Megan, tell our listeners what you did during that gap year exactly. Like, what was the adventure that you had?
People always ask me this, and I never really know what to say because, I mean, it's not like just like a 2-week trip that I took where I can just summarize everything in detail, but I guess the big picture is that I took a gap year after high school from July 2021 to July 2022 and lived on a lagoon catamaran with my parents. We sailed roughly 15,000 miles. I think we visited around 20 countries. And Dad here and I sailed across the Atlantic Ocean twice. And before my gap year, I honestly hadn't really had much experience with sailing at all. We chartered sailboats on occasion during family vacations, but I was pretty young and I never really helped with the actual sailing part. So the only real sailing I did before that gap year was, I think it was a 1-week American Sailing Association course in Florida that we took during COVID, where I somehow received a few certifications, but I'm definitely more of a hands-on learner, so I feel like everything I really learned about sailing, I learned over those first 2 months when I was aboard Helios, our sailboat.
So 15,000 miles at sea. That's like crossing the continental United States, 4 or 5 times, but doing it at kind of a walking pace. So what's it actually like living on the ocean like that, or crossing the Atlantic. Give us a sense of what's different from our normal day-to-day lives. And it's probably hard for most people to grasp.
Yeah, for sure. I always describe it to people as you have to be prepared for hours of boredom and stillness followed by 10 minutes of pure panic and chaos.
Right.
I feel like there are just so many unpredictable situations that could arise at any second, like whether it's, sudden weather changes, equipment failure, like when something breaks, or, when our life raft was suddenly deployed in the middle of the night when we were sailing in those heavy seas.
That was a bad night, wasn't it?
That was not a good night.
But fun, in hindsight.
Memorable.
Memorable.
Yeah. But I think that the mental aspect of it is also really different because even when you're bored, which is a lot of the times, or just feeling relaxed, there's always so many things you're thinking about kind of in the back of your mind, like, are my lines chafing? How can I adjust the sail? Is there a squall coming? Like, why is the mast making that noise? Is our anchor dragging? Like, little things like that could just, easily escalate into really dangerous situations.
Actually, Megan, that is why I really liked having you aboard. Is I think you were really well aware of those things. Great situational awareness. And we managed to get through all those miles and crossings with no injuries,
Yeah,
and
unbelievable.
maybe a few expensive repairs, but
Yeah.
nothing too bad.
Yeah.
So what was the biggest highlight or two of that year? Tell us a couple of the best experiences.
I think one of the best memories was definitely after that first Atlantic crossing. Once we docked in Granada, we came in second place in the rally that we were a part of.
It was like a race.
It was like a race. We got second.
So they say, right?
So
it's
they
a
say,
rally until
It's a
you're
rally, not a
ahead.
race, but
Yeah, unless you're in the lead, then it's a
you're winning.
race.
Yeah, but we were greeted on the dock by some of the staff from that rally organization, and I remember that it was funny because we weren't allowed to get off of our boat until the next day because of the COVID rules?
Yeah, COVID and immigration.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing we wanted to do was, get on land and walk around and stretch our legs.
Just ground.
And, get some good food because we had been living off of, seawater spaghetti. But they ended up delivering pizzas and beers to our boat so that we could eat something other than what we had on board.
That was awesome.
Yeah, that was one of the best memories for me. Let's see, I love the days when we could just easily get off our boat and go to shore. Because surprisingly, a lot of the times it could be really difficult or even impossible to get to shore. And Mom would always find the best restaurants to go to. So I just really loved going out to eat with you guys and trying all the different cuisines. And it was really nice just to get off the boat sometimes and not have to think about all the things I mentioned before for a little while.
Yeah, I guess that coastal cruising we did a lot of was pretty different than the ocean crossings, which we also did a lot of. So yeah, both were great. So that's cool. Okay, so look, I was there too, and I know it wasn't all fun and glory. What was a big low light for you during that year? Because I want to be balanced for our listeners here who might think, oh, I want to go live on a sailboat for a year because that sounds really cool, everything Megan said. But it's not all fun and games.
Yeah, well, honestly, I feel like I didn't have any super big lowlights, or at least none that I really remember. There were definitely days that were worse than others. I think the heat was a big part of it. It was always hot, and our boat, sometimes we could use the air conditioning, most of the times we didn't, so doing chores on board was always a little bit hard with the heat. And this is also going to sound really ridiculous, but I always dreaded going grocery shopping. It was never as simple as just hopping in a car and stopping by Target or Whole Foods. The whole grocery shopping process usually took us, 3 hours, between 2 and 4 hours. Usually we would walk there in some pretty miserable heat. And then once we get to the store, we're at a different store every time we go grocery shopping, and none of them are anything like Target, especially, in Europe. So we never knew where anything was in the store, and we would be trying to stock up for a week or a couple weeks at a time. So by the end of our trip, we would have multiple carts filled with food and just looked absolutely ridiculous. We were going through the store with all of our food.
Everyone has a little basket for their daily shopping.
Yeah, and we just had carts loaded to the top. And also, a lot of the food just wasn't labeled in English, and so the whole shopping process was just a pain, especially because Mom's a great cook, but she has some very specific ingredients like tofu that she's looking for, and, in those grocery stores, it's almost impossible to find. I know it seems like a really niche low light, but I just remember dreading it every time we had to do it. And then also, I don't know, I would get lonely sometimes since it was just me and my parents, and there weren't a lot of other people my age doing what I was doing. I didn't meet a lot of people on that trip that were my age. But I just really enjoyed having that year, to myself to think about my life. And, having that separation from my social life was honestly kind of nice. I think I take a little after my Aunt Kari in that regard.
Well, at least you're not saying the worst part of the year was being locked up on a little boat with your parents.
No, it really
That's
wasn't.
good.
It honestly wasn't.
That's good. So, boy, I didn't realize the shopping was such a low light for you. I thought you were going to say something
Yes.
about that huge North Atlantic storm when we had like 15, 20-foot seas and 50-mile-an-hour winds. And
Yeah.
you thought you were going to die that night in your coffin of a cabin.
Yeah, I did think I was gonna
But-
die that night. But that was one night, and I feel like the grocery shopping that happens like once
Over
a
and
week
over?
or over and
Ah.
over. So it's like a nightmare that keeps reoccurring.
Okay. So, look, maybe I'm blind, but now that the gap year's over, everything I've seen from you tells me you're super glad you made the decision to go for it, to defer school for a year. And so now you're a year behind your twin sister, you're a year behind all your friends from high school. So it can't be all awesome, but maybe it doesn't bother you. Tell us more, like even if it's small, what negatives would you say came from having taken a gap year?
I guess I've never really considered any negatives, honestly. I mean, I've thought about it, and it did cross my mind, before I took my gap year, that I'd be a year older than everyone else for the most part going into college. But in my mind, even before that, it didn't really matter. I mean, I had friends in high school who were a year younger, and, I feel like at this age, when we're all mature enough, it doesn't really matter if you're a year ahead or a year behind. And I can testify now that it really made no difference when I got to college. A lot of my friends are a year younger, but I also met a great friend who also took a gap year when I did, and now we're really great friends too. And so, to me, the age difference, it really just didn't matter as much, especially in college.
Okay, that's cool. So the aim of this podcast is to try to encourage other people to go out and do some adventures. They don't have to cross the Atlantic necessarily like you did, or they don't even have to get on a sailboat, but let's take this idea of a gap year. Maybe that doesn't work for someone who's 30 or 40 or 50 years old, but for some of your peers in high school, or maybe it's someone older who has a chance for a sabbatical, or just wants to step off the rat race for a little while, and maybe not a whole year, just take a month or a week or whatever. But just tell us on the flip side of the negative, what was the best thing that came out of the gap year concept for you? Like, what was the most gratifying aspect, or how did you grow as a person? I think you're better for it, but tell me how you think you're better for it.
Yeah, I think one thing that it really helped me do is just kind of putting into perspective what a challenge is and kind of how to take it on. And it honestly, after that year on the boat, it made college so much easier, in my opinion. Like, taking on these challenges in school was, like, to me, nothing compared to some of the challenges I faced on the boat. I mean, as you mentioned before, that one Atlantic storm that we were in, I honestly thought I was going to die. And, like, after, like, coming out of something like that and being like, oh, it was actually fine, like, I'm still here. And then, you get to college and it's like, oh no, I have a test. And, in that sense, like, I'm like, oh, I don't even need to be stressed about it. I'm not gonna die once I take that test, So I think, in high school, sometimes I would stress a little too much about schoolwork and all of that. Not that I don't take it seriously. I still take it really seriously, but I think...
Good girl.
But I think just it made me a little less stressed about things that I didn't really need to worry about at all. And I think the other thing is just communication with adults and people who are a lot older than me is something that the gap year really helped me develop as well, since I was living with, you guys who are a little older, and then also everyone else we met when we were at sea was a lot older. So I was constantly communicating, like sitting in on dinners, and when we all had drinks, it was me and a bunch of 50 plus adults, 50 years or older. So in that sense, I think it really helped me with my communication skills.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think it did. And I liked your comment about, like, I think being faced with some mother nature challenges, whether it's, that 50-mile-an-hour wind, or, those big seas out in the middle of nowhere, I think it does really help you handle some of the other daily things that we think are stressful, but
Yeah,
in the context
exactly.
of everything, it's really not that bad. So let's rewind to before your gap year, when you were making the decision, do I do it, do I not? Your decision to delay your college education an entire year, it was a big deal. So was it tough? What factors did you consider?
Well, to me, it wasn't a tough decision at all. I was a great student in, middle school, high school, but even starting in eighth grade, I knew that I wanted to take a break from my education to do something memorable. And I've heard a lot of other people tell me that the reason they chose not to take a gap year was because they knew that once they took a year off, they would never want to go back to school. Like they would just lose all momentum to go back and get an education. But for me, I knew it would be the opposite. I never really doubted that I would not go to college after my gap year, partly because I was already committed to a school before I left for my trip, but also because I knew that after a year of not being in that school environment and not having that social life, that I would really just want to go back. And I was right. I thought about college so much during my gap year, and by the end of it, I was just so excited to get to school. And also, I was just so fortunate to be able to have that opportunity to take that year off. And I knew that if I didn't do it, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So even though some parts definitely sucked, I would have made that same decision over again.
That's interesting. Two things you said there. One, if you didn't do it, you'd regret it for the rest of your life. One of my favorite quotes ever is a Mark Twain quote. It's not the things that you do in life that you'll regret the most. It's the things you don't do. And so I'm glad at your tender age you recognize that, because there's a lot of things that I think people want to do and they just don't, and then you're on your deathbed, that's what you regret. So I'm glad you saw that. And the other thing was, I never knew those factors in your decision to go or not go. Honestly, as a father, and I know speaking for mom, we were worried most about you kind of checking out of the academic world and not
Yeah.
getting back into it. And I didn't realize how you had thought that one through yourself. So I'm glad you did dive right back in.
Yes, don't worry.
We did. We did, but now we don't.
Yeah.
Can you recall if there was any one moment, any one triggering event when you definitively decided to, I'll say, seize the day, the Carpe Diem theme, and mentally commit yourself to the gap year? Is it something others might be able to replicate themselves? Like, what guidance would you give to a listener considering, again, maybe it's not a high school senior, but someone considering taking a big chunk of their life, stepping away from the normal track to do some adventure like that?
Yeah, well, there was never really one moment, I would say, where I decided to fully commit. I mean, as I said before, this trip was something I'd kind of manifested since you mentioned it when I was in eighth grade. And for some reason, it never occurred to me that it wouldn't happen. Like, I was prepared to take that year off to go sailing
It
no
almost
matter what.
didn't.
I know. And I think that, once I start thinking about something, I start to daydream a little bit. But I do think that my confidence that this trip would work out kind of, maybe encouraged you to take the leap as well, right?
Oh, damn right it did. It might not have happened for mom and me if not for you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Welcome.
you. So, if you think about this concept of Carpe Diem, of living each day to its fullest, of being proactive to live out your dreams, do you see your gap year decision as really fitting that concept? I mean, maybe it was just you being you. Maybe, maybe you don't think of it as, I'm going to go seize the day. Or was there some kind of internal dilemma you were experiencing about the decision to do it or not to do it, or sort of fear factor, like what scary thing might happen out on the high seas? Or and then one day, did you just wake up and say, hell with this, I'm just going to do it? Or it just evolved?
Well, I am kind of good at just doing it. I try not to think about the negatives too much. As I said before, I'm more of like a daydreamer. I kind of like, once I start thinking about it, I'm never going to think about any of the negatives or anything bad that could occur. I'm only thinking about, all of the exciting parts of it.
That helps. That really helps. If you dwell on the negatives, you'll never do it.
I know. Yeah, and that's one thing I think a lot of people just, maybe once you think about it a little too much, you kind of realize that it's impossible. But for me, it's more like, I'm just going to ignore that and just pretend like it's going to happen, and then it will happen.
So that's kind of a personality trait, but maybe one that people can train themselves on, right? To just,
Yeah, I think
like,
so.
you could make a physical list on paper, left side, right side, the good and the bad, and then just ignore the bad column and
Yeah.
just keep daydreaming about the good column.
Yeah. And I think there definitely was, that aspect of loneliness that I thought about a little. Like, I knew I wouldn't be able to keep in touch with my friends very well, and I wouldn't really see many people my age for the entire year. And, I'm kind of missing out on that first year of college that all of my friends are going to. So that was I was a little nervous going into that, but at the same time, my thought process is I'm not missing out on it. I'm just delaying it by a year, and I'm going to have that same 4 years in college that everyone else has. I'm going to have those same experiences, but I get to do something really cool before that too.
Yeah, great. It was a long lead up to that gap year. I mean, we started talking about it, 2-3 years in advance of actually, I mean, it took a lot of prep, and I had to figure out with work and wait for you to graduate and get the boat, arranged and everything. So
Yeah.
you were a sophomore, I think, in high school at the time when we really started talking about it seriously, maybe a junior. And was there a moment of self-doubt when you considered back? And I'm kind of dwelling on this because I think that's why most people don't just go out and live their dream, is there's some moment of self-doubt or some moment of fear or some moment where it all just comes to an end. And so I think one of the secrets is we're all going to face moments like that. It's those who can get past that moment and see things through that are the ones that actually fulfill their dreams. Was there any such moment when you considered backing out or questioned the wisdom of your decision, and how did you deal with that?
Well, I never really questioned my decision to take a gap year. I mean, obviously there were little factors that I was thinking about that, for some people might hinder that decision, but like I like to think big picture, and some of those little things weren't going to stop me from doing this really cool thing. But I think there were times when I did get really lazy in terms of when I was a junior, senior in high school, kind of preparing for my gap year, really lazy in terms of studying all of the sailing books that I was supposed to read. I think I just had no idea what to expect at all, so it was hard for me to set goals for myself beforehand in terms of learning and preparing for this big trip. So I think there was a little bit of self-doubt too once we were actually aboard the boat for the first time, since I felt like I hadn't prepared as much as I should have. So it was pretty overwhelming since we were literally just handed the keys to our boat and given maybe a 30-minute briefing, and then it was just us on the boat. And those first couple of days when we were crossing the Bay of Biscayne were so horrible, so brutal.
I was holding the toss your cookies bucket for about 24 hours. That was the only time in our year that I got seasick. And you were a zombie too.
I know. Yeah. So honestly, even the first 2 months were pretty stressful because it was just such a steep learning curve. And I definitely had moments where I was like, oh, I wonder, what my friends are doing at school right now. I wonder what I'd be doing if I was at school right now. Probably something a little less stressful. But the thing that kept me going was definitely just my curiosity for new adventure. I was always like thinking ahead to what the next anchorage would look like or what the next town would be. So there was always so much to look forward to.
What advice do you have for our listeners who are contemplating a similar adventure? And again, I don't want to stress just high schoolers taking a gap year. Make your answer maybe suitable to others as well. But what words of inspiration can you give them? Words that might nudge them to seize the day like you did?
I think my biggest advice is if even for a moment you think you might regret not doing something, then do it. If you think about it too hard, as I said before, you're going to start worrying and second guessing yourself. And, your plan is never going to go exactly how you planned it in your head, but it's still an adventure that you'll remember for the rest of your life. And looking at your experience, big picture, you will remember more of the good than the bad. And the stuff you didn't enjoy, well, you can just laugh about it like we do
like
now.
We do. like when the life raft launched itself. Mm-hmm. We almost had a really great hot tub for 3 days on the foredeck when we had to recover it. Before we close, I have to ask you out of curiosity, because I'm your father, but I still don't even know. What's the next adventure you have planned for yourself? Or what's the dream next adventure?
Well, I've been pretty focused on college recently. I'm just doing so much, but I think one of my goals, one of my next it's a smaller adventure, but still an adventure, is I really want to spend next summer out in Colorado and find a job out there. Since this summer I was interning in Naperville, which is, flatlands, and I love Colorado. So I'm going to find a way to stay in Colorado next summer and work out there.
All right, for all you prospective employers in Colorado, my daughter's looking for a job.
Yep, ready for a new job.
Well, Megan, look, I was really honored as a father to have you on my show. I love your story. I'm even more honored to have had you on the boat for a year, your first lieutenant support crossing the Atlantic twice.
Thanks, Dad. Really appreciate it.
That's all for now. Thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. If you like the show, there's nothing more valuable to me than you following it and sharing it with others. I drop a new episode every Friday, so tune in again for another great adventure story. And check out the accompanying website, www.gocarpediemnow.com, and then go seize the day and live your dream.